The first time Daniel looked at me, he made me feel like I was the only woman in the world. It was at a charity gala I never wanted to attend. Crystal chandeliers hung from the ceiling like frozen rain, and the air smelled of expensive perfume and quiet judgment. I stood near the balcony, staring at the city lights below, wishing I were invisible. "You look like you'd rather be anywhere else," a warm voice said beside me. I turned and saw him, confident but not arrogant, attractive but not intimidating. His smile felt effortless. "Is it that obvious?" I asked, only to someone who feels the same way at these events. That was Daniel. He told me he was building his own financial consulting firm. He spoke about ambition, independence, and proving himself without relying on powerful connections. When someone nearby mentioned that I was Richard Hawley's daughter, Daniel looked genuinely surprised. "I had no idea," he said softly. "I hope you don't think I came over because of that." "I don't," I replied. And I meant it. For the first time in my life, I felt like someone was interested in me, not my last name. We started seeing each other regularly. Coffee turned into dinners. Dinners turned into long conversations about dreams and fears. He listened carefully. When I spoke about the pressure of being my father's only child, he held my hand when I confessed that I sometimes felt more like a business extension than a daughter. "You deserve someone who loves you for you," he whispered once. I believed he was that someone. When he proposed 6 months later on a quiet beach at sunset, his voice trembling, I said yes without hesitation. My father didn't share my excitement. "He moves quickly," Dad said, pacing in his study. "Too quickly. You're suspicious of everyone," I replied defensively. "I'm suspicious of patterns. Men who talk about independence but gravitate toward wealth. Men who build trust before asking for access. Daniel isn't like that." He looked at me with a mixture of worrying and resignation. "If you're determined, I won't stop you, but I will make sure you're protected." I thought he was being dramatic. After the wedding, Daniel moved into my penthouse. At first, everything felt perfect. He insisted we operate as equals. "No secrets," he would say, wrapping his arms around me. "Marriage means partnership." He began reviewing my finances with me. "Your trust is structured well," he commented one evening, flipping through documents. "But there are inefficiencies. We can optimize this." He showed me projections and tax strategies. The language was complex, but he explained it patiently. "It's just restructuring," he reassured me. "You'll still own everything. We're just making it work smarter." I signed where he pointed. Then came investment opportunities. "I'm advising a tech startup," he said excitedly. "If we inject early capital, the returns could be extraordinary." "How much?" I asked. "Significant, but manageable. I'll put in my own funds too." I didn't question him. He asked me to co-sign a loan. "Only temporarily," he promised. "Once the deal closes, I'll remove your name." Months passed, and I noticed changes. He became busier, more secretive. Phone calls he stepped outside to take. Late night meetings. When I asked, he smiled gently. "Building a future isn't a 9-to-5 job." I tried to silence the unease growing inside me. One afternoon, I found a receipt in his jacket pocket from a hotel downtown, a luxury suite. When I confronted him, he didn't hesitate. "Client meeting," he said smoothly. "You know discretion matters." I wanted to believe him, but the cracks were widening. The real fracture came when I received an alert from my bank. A transfer of several $1,000,000 to a company I didn't recognize. I stared at the screen, my heart pounding. When he came home, I held up my phone. "What is this?" "That's the startup," he replied calmly. "The expansion phase 1 mentioned." "You never mentioned this amount," he sighed, as if I were being unreasonable. "Opportunities don't wait. I thought you trusted me." The word trusted felt like a weapon. That night, unable to sleep, I unlocked his phone using the fingerprint he had once playfully registered on my device. What I saw shattered whatever innocence I had left. Her name was Vanessa. Their messages were intimate, strategic, and cruel. She has no idea, Vanessa wrote. Of course she doesn't, Daniel replied. She's blinded by love. Another message read, once the final transfer's clear, I'll file for divorce. She'd be left with the liabilities. Liabilities. They were draining my liquid assets and shifting debt into accounts tied to me. My hands shook so violently I had to sit down. I scrolled further. They mocked my trust, planned vacations with my money, discussed timelines for leaving me once everything is secured. For hours, I sat in the dark, feeling something inside me die. By morning, the tears had dried. In their place was clarity. If Daniel wanted a game, he had chosen the wrong opponent. The next morning, I kissed him goodbye like nothing had changed. I'm sorry for doubting you, I said gently. I know you're doing this for us. He smiled, victorious. From that moment on, I began playing my own role. The supportive wife, the loving partner. I even suggested hosting a dinner party for his colleagues. Invite Vanessa, I added casually. I'd love to meet the people you work with. For a fraction of a second, his mask slipped, but he agreed. The night she walked into my home and realized who I was, the color drained from her face. You must be Vanessa, I said warmly, extending my hand. Daniel talks about your professionalism. Her handshake was cold. I watched them carefully throughout dinner. Every glance, every subtle tension. They thought I was naive. They had no idea I was documenting everything. Quietly, I contacted my father's former legal advisor. I didn't tell my father at first I needed proof before admitting he was right. We hired a forensic accountant. What he uncovered was worse than I imagined. Daniel had created shell corporations under variations of my name. He forged digital authorizations. He shifted funds into offshore accounts. He even used my social security number to secure additional lines of credit. And then came the most chilling discovery, a life insurance policy on me, taken out 6 months earlier. A massive one. With him as the sole beneficiary, there was no immediate evidence of physical intent, but the implication was enough to make my blood run cold. This wasn't just greed. It was calculation. When I finally told my father, he didn't shout. He didn't lecture me. He simply said, "We'll handle this." The legal team began building a case methodically. Fraud, identity theft, financial exploitation, conspiracy. Meanwhile, Daniel filed for divorce first. He accused me of emotional instability, claimed I made reckless financial decisions, requested spousal support. The audacity almost impressed me. In court, he looked composed, confident. Vanessa sat behind him, dressed conservatively, as if that could hide her involvement. His lawyer painted a portrait of a fragile heiress overwhelmed by responsibility. I listened without expression. Then it was our turn. My lawyer presented the forensic reports, bank statements highlighting unauthorized transfers, expert testimony confirming forged digital signatures, audio recordings of Daniel bragging about draining the accounts before the exit. The courtroom grew silent. When the life insurance policy was introduced, the judge leaned forward. Vanessa's composure cracked. Daniel tried to interrupt. This is manipulation, she's twisting context. But the evidence spoke louder than he ever could. The judge ordered an immediate freeze on all accounts linked to Daniel and his shell companies. A criminal investigation was launched. The divorce proceedings shifted dramatically. I was granted protective orders and full control of my protected assets. But I wasn't finished. Over the following months, investigators uncovered more tax evasion, falsified business records, and conspiracy charges involving Vanessa. Daniel's carefully constructed charm disintegrated under scrutiny. Friends distanced themselves. Investors withdrew. Vanessa disappeared long before the trial concluded. When the criminal case finally went to court, I attended the first day not for him, but for myself. He looked smaller, less polished. Fear replaced arrogance. His defense attempted to argue misunderstanding and shared decision-making, but the digital trail was undeniable. When the verdict was read guilty on multiple counts, he closed his eyes briefly. I felt no triumph, only resolution. He was sentenced to several years in prison. Vanessa received charges as an accessory and cooperated in exchange for a reduced sentence. Outside the courthouse, reporters shouted questions. Do you forgive him? I paused. Forgiveness doesn't erase consequences, I said calmly. Actions have outcomes. In the months that followed, I focused on rebuilding, not financially, because most of my protected assets were recovered, but emotionally. I enrolled in advanced business courses. I took direct control of my investment portfolio. I restructured every contract with ruthless precision. Trust became something earned, not assumed. One evening, my father joined me on the balcony where Daniel and I had once shared wine and promises. You've changed, he observed quietly. I had to. He nodded. I wanted to shield you from this world. I know, but maybe I needed to see it for myself. He placed a hand on my shoulder. You're stronger than I ever gave you credit for. Strength. It didn't feel like strength at first. It felt like survival. But over time, survival transformed into confidence. I began mentoring young women in business, teaching them about financial literacy, contract awareness, and the importance of independent control. Love, I learned, should never require surrendering security. Years later, I received a letter from Daniel. Prison had stripped his handwriting of its former elegance. He wrote about regret, about how he underestimated me, about how he convinced himself it was just business. I read it once and placed it back in the envelope. Some chapters don't need responses. The girl at the gala believed love would protect her from betrayal. The woman I became understands something deeper. Trust is powerful, but self-respect is unstoppable. Daniel married me for money. He thought he was manipulating a sheltered heiress. What he failed to realize was that beneath the softness was steel honed not by wealth, but by resilience. He tried to leave me broken and bankrupt. Instead, he left me wiser, stronger, untouchable. And this time, the power isn't borrowed. It's mine.